Hey, I'm some nobody, and when I decided to revisit Jason Voorhees at the start of 2026, it got me wanting to talk about his contemporaries. So I decided that over the course of this year, I'm going to make a video about each member of what horror fans call the Big Four. And since it's springtime, I'm going to talk about the guy from Springwood, the star of the Nightmare on Elm Street series and the Michelangelo of the Big Four, Freddy Krueger. Indisputably the most popular member of the four at his peak, this guy was an absolute rock star, not just in the horror genre, but in the mainstream too. A true household name in his prime, but these days, Krueger isn't even the biggest Freddy in horror. But to be fair, Freddy Fazbear doesn't have a prehistoric wasp named after him, so I'm sorry to tell you FNAF fans, but you lose again. But don't worry, Nightmare on Elm Street fans are losing too, because despite being the Stone Cold Steve Austin of horror, Freddy is the only member of the Big Four that I don't think will ever have another movie. It has been 16 years since the last Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 remake. And that movie's absolutely terrible, in my opinion one of the absolute worst of the 2000s horror remake trend. But that movie sucking ass isn't the only reason we haven't seen a Freddy movie in nearly 20 years, there's a number of other reasons. The primary one is that Krueger's creator, the late great Wes Craven, famously hated how popular Freddy became and how New Line handled his character. He hated it so much that he directed 4 movies that all have the message that horror movie sequels suck.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Wow, well the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So,
Nightmare on Elm Street saved New Line Cinema from bankruptcy and turned them into a juggernaut in Hollywood. The Lord of the Rings trilogy might not exist if not for the house that Freddy built. But the thing about Hollywood is, if you make them a lot of money, they're gonna want some more. Y'all excited for Scream 8 next year? There was a Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 with pretty much no involvement from Wes Craven less than a year after the first movie. Craven was much more involved with the third movie, Dream Warriors, but most of his input was discarded. He wrote the original script, but it wound up being so heavily rewritten that Wes isn't even credited as the writer. Dream Warriors wound up being one of the best movies in the series, and Freddy went on to become a superstar, but also a completely different character. As my primary care physician often says, Freddy Krueger became the Bart Simpson of horror. Craven's monster turned into a beloved pop culture icon, and New Line Cinema milked Freddy for everything they could. If you were a kid in the 80s and you walked into lunch with the Freddy Krueger lunchbox, you became the king of the dining hall. Even though Wes Craven passed away in 2015, his estate has owned the rights to Freddy as a character since 2019, and I imagine they're honoring Craven's wishes by keeping Krueger dead. We may be living in a world where Freddy's last 2 on-screen appearances are a cameo on a sitcom called The Goldbergs and being an avatar in the movie Ready Player One. Besides the Wes Craven estate, there is another big reason why I don't think Freddy will ever get another movie. See, Jason, Michael, and Leatherface all have their definitive actors, but them being massive men in mass means most of their movies don't feature those actors. You gotta think, Kane Hodder has played Jason more than any other actor, but he only played him in 4 out of 12 movies. So for the other members of the Big Four, you could theoretically cycle in different stuntmen to play them in franchise reboots until the end of time, or until the IP doesn't make money anymore. You just can't do that with Freddy.
And so I began to do the Freddy voice faster, and then when they applied the very speed technique in post-production, it would come out normal. So if I said, "Welcome to prime time, bitch!" it would come out on the feature film, "Welcome to prime time, bitch!" It would slow down naturally with just that hint, just that taste of very speed on it. So,
a big part of Freddy's success, actually the biggest part of Freddy's success, was Robert Englund. The character's scary looking for sure, the glove's cool, but everything that made Freddy an icon came from the guy underneath the makeup. Anybody else playing Freddy the way Englund did, no matter how good their performance, would just be a pale imitation of Englund. Anybody trying to make the character their own, no matter how good their performance, will never be able to take the character from Robert Englund. They can be classically trained and have a background in theater and have all the same influences for the character Englund did, it would not make a difference. There's only one Freddy Krueger, and he's pushing 80. Robert Englund is officially too old to play Freddy in live action. I doubt Hollywood is going to get to the point of doing big animated horror movies in time for Englund to play the character one last time. And frankly, I don't see much point in bringing the character back without Robert Englund. The only time where I'd want to see a Nightmare on Elm Street movie where Freddy isn't played by Robert Englund is a Freddy Krueger played by Willem Dafoe in a movie directed by Robert Eggers. And that's only because it's hard to turn down Kobe steaks slathered in caviar and dipped in gold. Plain and simple, people aren't going to accept a new Freddy actor until all the fans of Freddy Krueger die off and some director far in the future decides to remake a 100-year-old movie. And fun fact, Robert Englund knew that, which is why after the first flick he asked for more money to do the sequel. And New Line, showing why they nearly went bankrupt, told Englund, "Fuck off, we'll get someone else." So they got some dude, put him in a Freddy mask, filmed like one scene, and then they said, "Fuck, get Rob on the phone, give him whatever he wants." And I bet you Robert Englund was sitting right by the phone because he knew they'd call. And when they did call and he saw the ID, I bet he let it ring a few times. So yeah, nobody's allowed to make a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and even if they were allowed to, I just don't think it'd be worth it. All that being said, some of you were probably so young your parents aren't even old enough to have seen an original Freddy movie in theaters. If I'm sitting here talking about Freddy Krueger being the king of the horror genre, you're probably sitting there thinking, I think that bird from Garden of Bonbon would have something to say about that. So for this video, I'm gonna try and learn you a little bit.
My children. From the very beginning, it was the children who gave me my power. The Springwood Slasher. That's what they called me.
One massive advantage Freddy has over the other members of the Big Four is that Michael, Jason, and Leatherface can't talk. They're relegated to conveying their personalities through body language alone. Since Krueger can express himself physically and vocally, his personality shines a lot more than his contemporaries, and you already know people love Freddy's personality because he definitely didn't become a star off his looks. I think the best way to start talking about Freddy's personality, why he is the way he is to talk about why he was the way he was. Before I get into anything, I'm just going to say flat out, Freddy Krueger is indisputably the most evil of the Big Four. When it comes to serial killers, there's often a debate of nature versus nurture. Did their environment turn them into a monster, or is that just what they were always going to be? In the case of Mr. Krueger here, it would seem nature and nurture have set aside their differences just this once to team up against someone else. You could argue Freddy was evil from the moment he was conceived. Not born, his very conception was evil. His mother Amanda was a nun who worked at an asylum for the criminally insane. A few days before Christmas 1941, she was accidentally locked in a room full of the criminally insane. When the guards found her days later, she was barely alive, and 9 months later, Fred was born, the bastard son of 100 maniacs. And then Fred's life following his birth is full of all these serial killer cliches. He was bullied at school and beaten at home, but despite that, Freddy did grow up to have a relatively normal life. He got a job at the city's power plant and he had a wife and a kid. But Freddy also harbored a lifelong insatiable desire for pain. He killed small animals as a child, and as a teenager he received a near-orgasmic pleasure from cutting himself. And he also killed his alcoholic Alice Cooper foster father. So eventually Fred started killing kids, and you'd think that would keep kids from putting posters of Freddy up in their bedrooms, but you'd be surprised. Reason I said that Freddy was the most evil of the Big Four is that he's the only one of the four that actually derives pleasure from the killing. And more than just the killing, Freddy loves to torment. He gets off on the suffering, both of his victim and the people affected by his victim's deaths. I've always imagined that there were two big reasons why Fred targeted children. The first and more obvious reason is that kids were easier to kidnap and torture, especially back in the 60s and 70s. You know how your parents or your grandparents used to always brag about how when they were kids they'd leave the house in the morning and not come back until the sun went down? Well, there's a reason that generation had so many missing kids they had to put some on the back of the milk. The second reason is that nothing decimates a community like killing a kid. This dude was looking at a scrapbook full of the damage he'd done to Springwood like it was the good old days. And in Freddy's nightmares, he takes great pleasure in taunting the vigilante mob that's coming for him, even saying to their faces that he's going to continue killing kids. Wes Craven originally intended for Freddy to be a child molester because it was, quote, the worst thing I could think of, but I personally think that what Freddy actually did to the kids was way worse. In my opinion, somebody who just wants to inflict as much pain as possible and goes after kids because they're easiest is a much scarier concept than a pedophile. And I think following through on that original idea was one of the many missteps made by the remake. Fred Krueger was a level of evil that rarely pops up in real life, but we all know is out there. A kind of evil so heinous that it's incomprehensible until you're confronted with it. Remake Fred Krueger could have been taken down by Chris Hansen. Now, Fred was eventually caught for his crimes, but due to a search warrant being signed in the wrong place by a drunk judge, the overwhelming undeniable evidence that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Krueger was the Springwood slasher was inadmissible and he walked free. And so the people of Springwood took justice into their own hands and set him on fire. A moment that's been shown a few times, but my personal favorite version of it is probably from Freddy's Nightmares, where Freddy laughs at the parents of Springwood as he burns to death. But Fred Krueger was a man so sadistic that his evil cast such a large shadow over Springwood that he was able to persist after death. And so Freddy was born.
When I was alive, I might have been a little naughty. But after they killed me, I became something much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of.
Knowing what a monster Freddy was when he was alive is key to understanding what kind of monster he is now that he's actually a monster. A dream demon to be specific, and this right here is another aspect that makes Freddy entirely different from the rest of his cohorts in the Big Four. He's the only one that is expressly supernatural. In all of the Friday the 13th movies, Jason only has something paranormal going on in Part 9. Even though he becomes a zombie in Part 6, he does so through a more science-y method of horror. And in Halloween 5 and 6, Michael does have some ancient pagan cult giving him his powers. Considering that both of those guys only had something supernatural going on in the worst of their movies, I don't really count them as supernatural entities. So even though Jason, Michael, and Leatherface all have different stuff going for them, all three of them could be summed up as a big scary guy in a mask. A more realistic threat, a tangible one, scary but understandable. You wouldn't want to run into any of these guys in a back alley or anywhere really, but you know that you could run into them. Freddy is different. He only exists in the dream world and he only comes for you when you're asleep, at your most vulnerable. Craven got the idea for a killer that comes for you in your dreams from a phenomenon that went on in the 70s and 80s called sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome, where over 100 seemingly healthy young Southeast Asian men died in their sleep, which we now know is apparently linked to something called Brugada syndrome, but I'm not a doctor. One victim of this phenomenon had recurring nightmares and tried staying awake for days, explaining to his parents that if he went to sleep, the thing that was chasing him in his dreams would get him. That gave Craven the idea of killer nightmares, and then the song Dreamweaver by Gary Wright gave him the idea of a villain that could design and dictate the pace of your dreams. Now you should already understand why this is a scary concept, because I'm pretty sure all of us do as much as we possibly can to avoid being murdered in our sleep. You double check to make sure your doors and windows are locked, you make sure the security system's armed, you sharpen the bedside claymore, you give your guard dogs a perk 10 and a Red Bull to make sure they're ready to kill. Also, your several hours of unconscious defenselessness can be a moment of comfort. But Freddy takes that comfort and turns it into torture. Instead of looking forward to sleep, you start dreading it. You start doing anything you can to keep your eyes open. And the sleep deprivation is just another form of torture. And the scariest part of the whole thing is that no matter how hard you try, inevitably you will fall asleep. Jason, Michael, Leatherface, they're like bears or tigers, lions, any kind of animal that'll maul you. They're gonna come right at you. It's gonna be bloody, it's gonna be brutal. If you're lucky, it's gonna be quick. But Freddy's not like any other animal. He's all human. He wounds his prey, then lets it run off, and calmly follows behind it until it can't run anymore. No matter how much distance you cover, Freddy is going to get you. The moment you fall asleep, you're right back in his domain. And I use the word domain very deliberately, because Freddy getting these dream demon abilities is a lot like Gojo getting reverse curse technique. Fred Krueger was a sick, evil bastard, but he still had his limits, not morally, like actual physical limits. He had to worry about having a job and getting caught by the police, and obviously he could only do to his victims what he could physically manage. But now he exists in a world entirely under his control with near absolute power over his victims. He's quite literally living in his dream world, a world where the only limit to his sadism is his own imagination. And that's a huge part of why people love Freddy so much. Because now that he has this place where he can be as evil and mean and nasty and sick and twisted as he's always wanted to be, he's like a kid in a candy store. He's having a blast.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too!
Freddy isn't just the only member of the Big Four that enjoys what he does, he absolutely loves what he does. He's the most evil member of the group and the happiest. And this really comes through in the way he operates. If you look at Freddy's first ever scene, Tina's nightmare from the original Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's first line of dialogue in the entire franchise is him being silly. You know, he says Tina's name like, Tina, and then he laughs. And then he extends his arms to crazy proportion for no reason whatsoever, just because he can. And then right after that, he starts running after Tina in this really silly way, this goofy run, for the sole purpose of letting Tina think that she can run from him. And he's giggling the entire time. He is absolutely giddy. And the next thing he does is he hits this fucking Bugs Bunny maneuver, jumping out from behind a tree too skinny to hide behind, and cuts his fingers off just because it's funny to him. He lets Tina think she can fight back just so he can add to the horror by having his fucking face come off. And his face coming off is accompanied by the most maniacal laugh he will hit in the entire series. Putting it simply, from his very first scene, Freddy Krueger is a character that is having a lot of fun. He's got this sick, twisted sense of humor where pain and violence is the setup and the punchline, and Robert Englund does a phenomenal job portraying Freddy as this absolute maniac giving godlike power. Vocally, Englund just does an amazing job getting across this combination of glee and nastiness from Freddy. In pop culture, the character eventually becomes known for saying bitch a lot because his most iconic line in the series involves him saying bitch. But the way Robert Englund says it, the way he delivers each and every bitch, I can only compare it to when you're playing a video game and you get a kill you didn't deserve, so you say something like, "Oh, sit down, bitch." Like I said, a combination of glee and nastiness.
We'll see, bitch. We'll just see.
And you know, Freddy being able to talk, that was a big thing. That really made him stand out from the rest of the Big Four, but the body language of the character is incredibly important too. Something that really gets across the idea that Freddy is having a lot of fun is the fact that he's a very animated character. I wouldn't go as far to compare him to The Mask and say he's a living cartoon character, but Freddy doesn't really make small, subtle motions. Everything the guy does is a bit exaggerated, which is where Robert Englund's background in theater really comes into play, because you know, in theater you have play to the back of the room. You can't do these small, subtle motions that only the front row is gonna pick up on. Freddy kind of moves like a character on a stage, and it imbues a lot of his emotions with this disrespectful, kind of mocking tone to them. It gets across just how much power Freddy has over his victims, that every action he takes kinda has this aura to it, like he's just fucking around. It makes scenes where Freddy is meant to be scary, more threatening or intimidating, and it adds to the comedy of scenes where Freddy is supposed to be funny. One big issue with Jackie Earle Haley's portrayal of Freddy in the remake is that he just kinda stands around. Physically and vocally, he doesn't really bring anything to the character except for the little scissor fingers gimmick, which is nice. He's just kind of a generically scary guy, whereas Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger was a full-fledged character, where every aspect of the performance is built around the idea that this guy is living his dream. He's a monster, but he's having fun, which I think is the aspect of his personality that really drew people to him. In my Jason video, I talked about how Friday the 13th was the first horror movie where your favorite character was the killer. In the case of Nightmare on Elm Street, past the first movie, Freddy was the draw. Freddy brought in the house. People absolutely love Freddy, or at least love to hate him, and it's because the character is just having so much fun, and Robert Englund does such a good job portraying Freddy that he's got this charisma to him. And it's a pretty simple thing. You naturally like people who are sincerely having a good time and being themselves. The funniest people are the ones who don't care about making anybody but themselves laugh. Just goes to show, man, you can be a sadistic, psychopathic, child-murdering dream demon, but if you're like fun, you got good energy, you're outgoing, people will still love you. Sorry, introverts, you lose again. But Freddy enjoying his godlike power doesn't just shine through Robert Englund's masterful performance of him. There's another element that I think made Freddy a star that had nothing to do with Robert Englund, because after all, he's just the body.
I've got the brain.
In my Jason video, I talked about how important the practical effects were to the first Friday the 13th success. It came out in a time where people weren't quite used to super graphic violence in movies. It showed people things they had never seen before, pushing boundaries just like Psycho 20 years before it. And I bring it up now because if we're talking about using amazing practical effects to show people things they had never seen before, nobody did it like Freddy. His power set lets him do things that no other horror villain can. Like his first appearance I just talked about, he does several physically impossible things just as a gag. You know, you can have Jason, Michael, and Leatherface do all kinds of cool and creative shit, but at the end of the day, you know, you can't have Jason conjure up an image of him cutting himself out of somebody like a cocoon. In the same way that Freddy's cruelty is only limited by his imagination, the filmmakers are only limited by their imagination and what they can actually make happen. A lot of the most iconic kills in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise aren't necessarily the most violent and brutal and graphic, they're the most creative. Like Glenn's death in the original isn't super gory, you don't see him die at all, but watching Johnny Depp get sucked into his bed and then like 500 gallons of blood shoot out of the hole is insane. They did that by creating an entire fake room set where everything was pinned or nailed down or whatever, and the room itself could be rotated on an axis. So the ceiling is actually the floor and there are guys on top of the room pouring blood through the bed on the ceiling. And again, man, I love Jason, but there is no conceivable Jason kill where you'd have to do all this. Whereas you can pretty much do whatever you want with Freddy and it all makes sense because of his personality and his power set. My favorite kill in the entire series is from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. It's this guy Phil who sleepwalks and he's into puppets. Freddy manifests into his room as one of his puppets with some crazy stop motion animation. And then Freddy slices up his arms and legs, pulls his tendons out and uses said tendons like puppet strings. And I absolutely love the visual of giant Freddy puppeting Philip off of the ledge. It's a horrifying death, but an insanely creative one that no other horror character could really pull off. And that's the key thing. You take Robert Englund's performance, bam, non-factor. I think Freddy still would have become an icon just for the fact that nobody was doing it like him. First movie alone, you look at how many iconic visuals there are that technically don't have anything to do with Robert Englund. Freddy's glove coming up out of the bathtub, Freddy's face coming through the walls, the fucking Freddy tongue coming out of the phone. These insane visuals are carried throughout Freddy's entire original run. Even in the worst Nightmare on Elm Street movies, you're seeing stuff that you're not going to see in any other horror movie. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, there's this girl Debbie who's afraid of cockroaches, so obviously Freddy turns her into a cockroach in a horrifying practical effects transformation. It's a lot like the Fly remake with Jeff Goldblum where it's like the bug is trying to break out of her human skin. It's fucked up. In Part 5, there's this guy Danny. He drives a motorcycle, so Freddy fuses him with the motorcycle, like it consumes him. And the end result, it looks like something you see out of 40K. It's gnarly. In Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, Freddy uses a power glove to kill a guy in a video game, and it's stupid and it sucks, but you wouldn't see it in any other horror franchise. 4, 5, and 6 are not good movies, but I'd rather watch any of them over the remake because at least there's some creativity. All the remake does is copy the original and do it worse, replicating iconic, practically done visuals with dog shit CGI and having Freddy barely take advantage of the fact that he has near godlike power. But it goes to show, you can't give a character like Freddy Krueger to some hack. There has to be somebody with an actual vision behind the camera. Freddy Krueger's impact on the horror genre cannot be understated. He was kind of a second Michael Myers in the sense that his impact was so huge, characters inspired by him went on to become icons themselves. In the years following Nightmare on Elm Street, we had a fair few talkative supernatural killers, most obvious one being Chucky from Child's Play, who's often seen as a fifth member to the Big Four. But you've also got the Leprechaun from Leprechaun and the Djinn from Wishmaster. Fun fact, Robert Englund is actually in the first Wishmaster movie. Anyway, just like the Jason video, I'm going to end this one by telling you my personal favorite Freddy movies. Obviously, the first one is a goddamn classic. You don't need me to tell you that. If that first movie wasn't great, I wouldn't be making this video. But I'm also pretty fond of the second movie. It's got an interesting premise, but it's also got an interesting depiction of Freddy where he's actually more sinister than the first movie and considerably darker in tone. Which is interesting because you could also interpret Freddy in that movie as being the main character Jesse's desire to have sex with men. It's a fun watch. Obviously, Part 3 Dream Warriors is fucking fantastic. It's the absolute peak of the series. It's got a ton of crazy visuals and dream sequences. Freddy is a good mix of funny and scary. The characters got a bit of depth to them. They're all very likable. It's like I said at the beginning, despite them screwing over Wes Craven a little bit, Dream Warriors is the movie that made Freddy a superstar. 4, 5, and 6 are all bad and they get worse as they go on, where 6 is the worst of the original Freddy movies. They're not unwatchable, there's some fun stuff in them, I just wouldn't recommend them unless you got a friend to watch them with. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is okay, it's better than 4, 5, and 6, but it's not as good as 1, 2, or 3 in my opinion. And then finally, Freddy vs. Jason. Characters are kinda shallow, the writing's a little loosey-goosey, but this movie is fucking beast mode. I kinda flip-flop on this movie sometimes, but today I'm really feeling it. Especially because I'm talking about it as a Freddy fan, because Robert Englund is amazing in that movie. You get some primo Freddy content, and you get Freddy and Jason fighting to an early 2000s metal track. Being entirely honest, the only Freddy movie I straight up do not recommend, I'm going to actively tell you not to watch, is the remake. That movie's so bad it's not even fun to watch with your friends and riff on. If you try it after like 20 minutes, all of you are just going to be sitting there individually looking at your phones, not talking to each other. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll be back in summer with a Leatherface video.